Ethan Ross had always dreamed of being a renowned ventriloquist, but his career was going nowhere. His performances were average at best, and he struggled to captivate his audiences. His routines lacked the spark needed to set him apart from the countless other entertainers trying to make it big. One rainy afternoon, while wandering through a lesser-known part of the city, Ethan stumbled upon a small, dimly lit curiosity shop that seemed to beckon him inside. The shop was cluttered with oddities from every corner of the world, ancient artifacts, dusty books, and peculiar trinkets. At the back of the shop, partially hidden under a faded cloth, Ethan found an antique ventriloquist's dummy. The dummy's wooden face was intricately carved with lifelike features, and its glass eyes seemed to hold a strange, almost hypnotic glint. It was a far cry from the cheap plastic dummies Ethan had been using. As Ethan lifted the dummy, a frail, elderly shopkeeper appeared from the shadows. His eyes, sharp and knowing, fixed on Ethan with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Ah, you found Charlie," the shopkeeper said, his voice a raspy whisper. "He's been waiting for the right person to come along." Ethan was captivated by the dummy. It felt as if it had a story to tell, one that he could use to breathe new life into his act. When he asked the price, the shopkeeper quoted a surprisingly low figure. "Take good care of him," the old man warned. "Charlie has a way of revealing things about his owners." Ignoring the cryptic warning, Ethan purchased Charlie and hurried home, eager to start practicing. As soon as he began rehearsing with the dummy, he noticed a remarkable difference. Charlie seemed to have a personality of his own, and Ethan found himself improvising lines and jokes he had never thought of before. It was as if the dummy was guiding him, bringing out a side of his performance that had been hidden away. Ethan's first performance with Charlie was a small gig at a local comedy club. Nervous but excited, he took the stage, the dummy perched on his knee. From the moment he started, the audience was hooked. Charlie's witty banter and sharp comebacks had the crowd in stitches. For the first time in his career, Ethan felt the thrill of a truly engaged audience, hanging on his every word. As the show went on, Ethan found himself more and more mesmerized by Charlie's presence. The dummy seemed to anticipate his thoughts, seamlessly transitioning between jokes and interactions. The audience's laughter grew louder, their applause more enthusiastic. Ethan couldn't believe his luck. He had finally found his ticket to success. But as the night wore on, something strange happened. In the middle of a joke, Charlie turned his head slightly, his glassy eyes locking onto Ethan's with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. The dummy's mouth moved, and a voice, deeper and more resonant than Ethan's ventriloquism skills could produce, whispered, "You can't hide forever, Ethan." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. For a moment he was convinced he had imagined it. The audience seemed oblivious, still laughing and clapping. Shaking off the unease, Ethan forced himself to continue, pushing the disturbing moment to the back of his mind. The performance ended with a standing ovation, and Ethan was flooded with a sense of accomplishment. As he packed up, several audience members approached, praising his act and asking for autographs. Ethan thanked them, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. Back in his dressing room, Ethan confronted Charlie, his hands trembling. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, staring into the dummy's lifeless eyes. But Charlie remained silent, his wooden face frozen in its usual expression. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Had he imagined it? Was he just exhausted from the stress of his performance? Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Ethan decided to record his next rehearsal. He set up a camera in his living room and began practicing, paying close attention to every move and sound. Hours passed without incident, and Ethan started to feel foolish for his earlier panic. But just as he was about to turn off the camera, Charlie's head jerked to the side, and that same chilling voice emerged. "Remember your old friend, Martin? The one who disappeared all those years ago?" Ethan's blood ran cold. Martin had been his childhood friend, a boy who had mysteriously vanished when they were teenagers. The disappearance had never been solved, and Ethan had buried the memory deep within himself, haunted by guilt and suspicion. Ethan rewound the footage, watching in disbelief as Charlie spoke on his own. There was no trick, no sleight of hand. The dummy was alive, and it knew his darkest secrets. Panic set in as Ethan realized that his past was coming back to haunt him, and that Charlie was more than just a puppet. The dummy was a conduit, revealing truths that Ethan had long tried to forget. Trembling, Ethan turned off the camera and sat in the silence of his apartment, grappling with the horrifying reality. His success had come at a price, and now he was entangled in a nightmare that threatened to unravel his life. As he glanced at Charlie, sitting innocuously on the chair, he knew that the debut performance was only the beginning of a much darker journey. The days following the chilling discovery were a blur of anxiety and paranoia for Ethan. He canceled his upcoming shows, citing illness, and isolated himself from friends and colleagues. Charlie, once a source of pride and success, now sat ominously in the corner of Ethan's living room, his glassy eyes reflecting a malevolent glint. Every time Ethan tried to approach the dummy, a sense of dread washed over him, as if Charlie were silently watching and waiting. Desperate for answers, Ethan scoured the internet for any information about haunted ventriloquist dummies. He found countless stories and urban legends, each one more terrifying than the last. Some claimed that such dummies were possessed by malevolent spirits seeking revenge, while others suggested they were cursed objects, harboring the souls of the wrongfully dead. The stories were eerily similar to his own experience, and Ethan began to wonder if Charlie was one such entity. Determined to find out more about Charlie's origins, Ethan returned to the curiosity shop where he had purchased the dummy. But when he arrived, he found the shop boarded up and abandoned. The windows were covered in grime, and a faded "for sale" sign hung crookedly on the door. Neighbors claimed the shop had been closed for years, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. The realization that the shopkeeper and the shop itself might have been a manifestation of something supernatural only deepened his unease. Ethan's nights were plagued by nightmares. In his dreams, he saw Martin's face, twisted with anger and betrayal, accusing him of abandoning their friendship. The dreams felt incredibly real, and Ethan would wake up in a cold sweat, Charlie's glassy eyes seeming to gleam in the moonlight. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and Ethan felt himself spiraling into a state of constant fear. The only person Ethan could think of who might believe him was Claire, his ex-girlfriend and a paranormal investigator. Claire had always been fascinated by the supernatural, a passion that had driven a wedge between her and Ethan. But now, Ethan desperately needed her expertise. Swallowing his pride, he called her, his voice trembling as he explained the situation. Claire's initial skepticism quickly turned to concern as Ethan described the events. She agreed to visit and examine Charlie, intrigued by the possibility of encountering a genuine paranormal phenomenon. When Claire arrived, the atmosphere in Ethan's apartment was palpable with tension. She immediately sensed something was wrong. As Claire examined Charlie, her expression grew more serious. She took out a series of instruments, an EMF meter, a spirit box, and several other devices Ethan didn't recognize. "This dummy isn't just haunted," she said, her voice low and steady. "It's possessed by a spirit with a deep connection to you. We need to find out what it wants." Claire suggested performing a séance to communicate with the spirit inhabiting Charlie. Ethan was hesitant, but he knew he had no other choice. They lit candles and sat in a circle, their hands clasped tightly. Claire began to chant, invoking the spirit to reveal itself. The air grew heavy and the temperature dropped. Suddenly, Charlie's eyes flickered to life and his mouth moved on its own. "Why did you betray me, Ethan?" Charlie's voice was a chilling blend of human and inhuman tones. "Why did you leave me to die?" Ethan's mind raced, trying to make sense of the spirit's accusations. Memories of his childhood flooded back, and he remembered the day Martin disappeared. They had been exploring an abandoned building when a tragic accident occurred. Martin had fallen, and in a moment of panic and fear, Ethan had fled, leaving his friend to an unknown fate. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he confessed his guilt. "I'm sorry, Martin. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." Charlie's eyes seemed to soften, but the malevolence remained. "You must make amends, Ethan. Only then will I be at peace." Ethan felt a surge of determination. He had to find Martin's remains and give him a proper burial to right the wrongs of the past. Claire, sensing the urgency, agreed to help him. They would have to return to the abandoned building where it all began, and face whatever horrors awaited them. As they prepared to leave, Ethan glanced at Charlie one last time. The dummy's eyes seemed to follow him, a reminder of the dark journey ahead. The weight of his past sins bore down on him, but he knew he had to see this through. For Martin, for himself, and to finally put an end to the nightmare that had taken over his life. Ethan and Claire set out early the next morning, the sky a somber gray reflecting the weight of their mission. The abandoned building where Martin had disappeared was located on the outskirts of town, a decaying structure long forgotten by most. As they drove, the memories of that fateful day haunted Ethan, his mind replaying the events that led to his friend's tragic end. The building, once a bustling factory, now stood as a monument to decay and neglect. Ivy crawled up its walls, and broken windows gave it a ghostly appearance. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rot. Ethan's heart pounded as they approached, the reality of what they were about to do sinking in. Inside, the building was a maze of crumbling walls and broken floors. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water and the rustling of small animals. Ethan led Claire to the spot where Martin had fallen. It was a part of the factory that had been deemed unsafe even back then, with gaping holes in the floor and precarious beams overhead. Claire looked around, her expression grim. "This place is a death trap," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "Are you sure this is where it happened?" Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I'm sure this is where I last saw him." They began to dig through the rubble, using shovels and their hands to move the debris. The air was filled with dust, and every movement seemed to stir up memories of that day. Hours passed, and just when Ethan was about to give up hope, Claire's hand brushed against something solid. She cleared away more debris, revealing a skeletal hand. Ethan fell to his knees, his breath hitching. "Martin," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry." Claire, meanwhile, continued to uncover the rest of Martin's remains. It was a grueling and emotional process, but eventually they had unearthed what was left of Ethan's childhood friend. The sight was both heartbreaking and cathartic for Ethan. He knew that this was the first step in making amends for his past. As they prepared to give Martin a proper burial, Claire began to perform a ritual to cleanse the spirit and release it from the mortal world. She chanted softly, her voice a soothing counterpoint to the tension that filled the air. The atmosphere grew heavy, and a cold wind swept through the building, making the candles they had lit flicker. Charlie, who had been brought along and placed nearby, began to move again. His eyes glowed with an eerie light, and his mouth opened. "You've found me, Ethan," the dummy said, its voice tinged with both sadness and relief. "But there's one more thing you must do." Ethan looked at Charlie, his resolve hardening. "What is it?" "I'll do anything to make this right." "You must destroy the dummy," Charlie replied. "Only then will I be free." Ethan hesitated, the bond he had formed with Charlie conflicting with the necessity of the act, but he knew it had to be done. He took a deep breath, picked up a nearby sledgehammer, and brought it down on Charlie. The dummy splintered under the force, and a wail of anguish echoed through the building as the spirit was released. For a moment, everything was silent. Then a sense of peace washed over Ethan. The air seemed lighter, and the oppressive weight of guilt lifted from his shoulders. Claire finished her ritual, and the cold wind dissipated. She looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. "It's done," she said softly. "Martin can finally rest in peace." Ethan nodded, his emotions a tumultuous mix of grief, relief, and lingering guilt. They carefully gathered Martin's remains, placing them in a makeshift coffin they had brought along. With Claire's help, Ethan found a quiet spot in a nearby cemetery where they could lay Martin to rest. The burial was a somber affair, attended only by the two of them. Ethan spoke a few words, apologizing once more and promising to honor Martin's memory. As they covered the grave with earth, Ethan felt a sense of closure. He knew he would never fully forgive himself for what had happened to Martin, but he had taken the first step toward redemption. The dark chapter of his life was finally coming to an end, and he could begin to heal. They left the cemetery in silence, the weight of their task hanging over them. As they drove back to town, Ethan glanced at the empty spot where Charlie had once sat in the back seat. The dummy was gone, and with it, the malevolent presence that had haunted his life. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in years he felt a glimmer of hope. The past could not be changed, but he could learn from it. And with Claire's support, Ethan was determined to face whatever came next with courage and resolve. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan slowly began to rebuild his life. The traumatic events with Charlie and Martin's spirit had left him shaken, but he was determined to move forward. Claire stayed close, her presence a comforting reminder that he was not alone in his struggle. They resumed their friendship, finding solace in each other's company. Ethan returned to his performances, though he found it difficult to face the stage without Charlie. His routines felt hollow, the spark that had once animated his act seemingly gone. Despite his best efforts, audiences were no longer captivated by his shows, and the applause was polite rather than enthusiastic. Ethan couldn't help but wonder if he would ever find that magic again. One evening, after a particularly lackluster performance, Ethan sat alone in his dressing room, staring at the empty spot where Charlie had once been. He felt a pang of loneliness, mixed with a strange sense of relief. The dummy had brought him success, but at a terrible cost. Now he was free from its malevolent influence, but also adrift, unsure of his future. As Ethan pondered his next steps, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Claire, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Ethan looked up, curiosity piqued. "What is it, Claire?" "I've been doing some research," she began, taking a seat opposite him. "I know we've dealt with Martin's spirit, but I have a feeling that there's more to this. I think we need to dig deeper into your past." Ethan frowned, the familiar sense of dread creeping back. "What do you mean?" Claire hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Charlie mentioned dark secrets about your past. We've uncovered one with Martin, but what if there are others? Unresolved issues that might still be haunting you?" Ethan's mind raced, memories flooding back. His childhood had been marked by more than just Martin's disappearance. There had been other incidents, other friends lost or driven away, all shrouded in mystery and fear. Could it be that his past held even more sinister secrets? Determined to confront whatever remained hidden, Ethan agreed to Claire's plan. They would revisit the places and people from his past, seeking answers and closure. Their first stop was Ethan's childhood home, a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town. The house had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up and the yard overgrown with weeds. As they approached, Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Memories of his parents' frequent fights, his father's sudden disappearance, and the eerie feeling of being watched flooded back. Claire sensed his unease and took his hand, offering silent support. Inside the house was a time capsule of Ethan's troubled childhood. Dust-covered furniture, faded photographs, and remnants of his parents' lives lay scattered about. They explored each room, uncovering fragments of the past. In the attic, they found a box of old family photos and letters, revealing a history of mental illness and unexplained disappearances in his family. Ethan's mother had often spoken of a family curse, a malevolent force that had haunted them for generations. At the time, Ethan had dismissed it as the ravings of a troubled mind, but now he wondered if there was truth to her words. Claire suggested they consult a psychic medium she trusted, someone who could help them understand the supernatural elements at play. The medium, an older woman named Madame Zelda, welcomed them into her home, a small cottage filled with mystical artifacts and the scent of incense. She listened intently as Ethan and Claire recounted their experiences, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "You are indeed marked by a dark presence," Madame Zelda said, her voice grave. "It is an ancient spirit tied to your family by a curse. This spirit has influenced your actions, drawing you to the dummy and using it to torment you. To break the curse, you must confront the spirit directly and seek its forgiveness. Ethan felt a surge of fear and determination. He had come this far, and he was not about to back down now. With Madame Zelda's guidance, they prepared for a ritual to summon the spirit and end the curse once and for all. The ritual took place in Ethan's childhood home, the atmosphere charged with tension. They arranged candles in a circle, and Madame Zelda began to chant, calling forth the spirit. The air grew cold, and a sense of malevolence filled the room. Ethan felt a presence, a dark figure emerging from the shadows. It was his father, or rather, the spirit that had taken his father's form. The apparition's eyes burned with anger and sorrow. "You cannot escape your past, Ethan," it whispered, its voice echoing in the empty house. "You are bound to me by blood and by sin." Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "I know what you are, and I know what you want. I'm here to make amends for my family's mistakes. I seek your forgiveness and release from this curse." The spirit hesitated, its form flickering. Ethan continued, pouring out his heart, confessing his fears, regrets, and desire to break free from the darkness. As he spoke, the spirit's anger seemed to wane, replaced by a profound sadness. "You are the first to face me with courage," the spirit said. "Very well, I will release you, but know this. The darkness will always linger. It is up to you to keep it at bay." With a final mournful wail, the spirit dissolved into the air, leaving a sense of calm in its wake. The candles flickered out, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of relief and exhaustion. Madame Zelda nodded approvingly. "You have done well, Ethan. The curse is broken, but the shadows will always be a part of you. Embrace the light and remember what you have learned." Ethan thanked her, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. He knew that his journey was far from over, but he had taken a crucial step toward healing. With Claire by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they left the house, Ethan glanced back one last time. The shadows seemed less threatening, and the past felt like a distant memory. He was determined to build a better future, one where he could honor Martin's memory and the lessons he had learned. But as they drove away, a strange sense of unease lingered. Unbeknownst to Ethan, a small, unmarked box sat in the attic, forgotten in the chaos. Inside, a pair of glassy eyes stared out, waiting for the right moment to awaken once more. The past, it seemed, was not entirely ready to let go.